The dust swirled around Maria Chin's worn boots as she stood at the edge of Highway 82, her thumb extended toward the endless Texas sky. The sun blazed overhead like a merciless eye, and sweat trickled down her neck despite the early morning hour. Her small suitcase sat beside her feet, containing everything she owned in this vast, foreign country that had promised so much and delivered so little. Maria had been walking for 3 hours since dawn, leaving behind the trailer park where she'd spent the last 6 months cleaning houses for families who barely acknowledged her existence. The work had dried up when Mrs. Henderson accused her of stealing a necklace that later turned up in her own jewelry box. No apology came, just a dismissal and whispered warnings to other potential employers. Now, with only $43 in her pocket and nowhere left to turn, Maria faced the harsh reality that had been creeping closer each day. She needed to get to town, to the bus station, to anywhere that might offer a chance at survival. But the nearest town was 15 miles away, and in this heat, walking wasn't an option. The sound of an approaching engine made her heart skip. A pickup truck appeared on the horizon, its chrome bumper catching the sunlight like a beacon of hope. As it drew closer, Maria could see it was well-maintained, painted a deep blue that reminded her of the evening sky back in Guangzhou. She raised her thumb higher and tried to arrange her features into what she hoped was a trustworthy expression. The truck slowed, then pulled over about 20 feet past where she stood. Maria grabbed her suitcase and hurried toward the driver's side, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Through the rolled-down window, she saw a man who appeared to be in his early 40s, with weathered hands gripping the steering wheel and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Will you take me to town?" Maria asked, her English careful and measured. She had practiced this phrase countless times, knowing that her accent often made people uncomfortable, but they sometimes pretended not to understand her perfectly clear words. The man studied her for a long moment. His name was Jake Morrison, though Maria didn't know this yet. What she saw was a rancher whose face told the story of long days under the sun, whose calloused hands spoke of honest work. His hair was the color of autumn wheat, touched with silver at the temples, and when he looked at her, she felt neither the pity nor the suspicion she had grown accustomed to seeing in strangers' eyes. Jake had been driving to town himself when he spotted the small figure on the roadside. Something about the way she stood, straight back despite obvious exhaustion, reminded him of his late wife's determination. Sarah had possessed that same quiet dignity, that refusal to be broken by circumstances beyond her control. "Town's a fair piece," Jake said finally, his voice carrying the slow cadence of rural Texas. "But I reckon I can get you there." Relief flooded through Maria so suddenly that her knees almost buckled. "Thank you," she whispered, moving toward the passenger door. "Hold on there," Jake called out, causing her to freeze mid-step. Her heart sank, certain he was about to change his mind, to drive away and leave her stranded once again. Jake turned off the engine and stepped out of the truck. He was taller than Maria had expected, probably 6 feet, with the lean build of someone who worked with his hands for a living. His jeans were clean, but faded, his boots scuffed from years of ranch work. "First, come home with me," he said, and Maria's blood turned to ice. She had heard these words before, or variations of them. Men who offered help, but expected payment in forms she would never give. Her grip tightened on her suitcase handle, her body tensing for flight even though she had nowhere to run. Jake must have seen the fear flash across her face, because he immediately raised both hands in a peaceful gesture. "Now don't go getting the wrong idea," he said quickly. "It's just that you look like you haven't had a decent meal or a safe place to rest in quite some time. My ranch is just 5 miles up the road. You can clean up, have some breakfast, maybe catch a few hours of sleep before I drive you down. No strings attached." Maria stared at him, trying to read the truth in his weathered features. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. But Jake's eyes held something she hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine kindness without calculation. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. Jake was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My wife used to say that kindness was like water in the desert. Most folks are dying of thirst for it, but we're all too proud or too scared to ask for a drink." The mention of his wife, spoken in past tense, softened something in Maria's chest. She understood loss, understood the way grief could make a person either cruel or compassionate. This man had chosen compassion. "Your wife," Maria said carefully. She is gone these past 2 years, Jake replied simply. Cancer. The word hung in the air between them like a prayer offered to an empty sky. Maria had lost people too. Her parents in a factory accident, her brother to the promise of America that had proved as elusive for him as it was proving for her. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. Jake nodded once, then walked around to open the passenger door for her. The gesture was old-fashioned, respectful, and it reminded Maria of her father, who had believed that treating others with dignity was the mark of a civilized person. She hesitated for only a moment before placing her suitcase in the truck bed and climbing into the cab. The interior smelled like leather and honest work, with a faint trace of coffee and something else she couldn't identify, perhaps the lingering sin of the woman who had once shared this space. As Jake started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, Maria allowed herself to relax slightly into the worn cloth seat. Through the windshield, she could see nothing but endless sky and rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional mesquite tree. It was beautiful in its starkness, this landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. What's your name? Jake asked as they drove, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Maria, she replied. Maria Chun. That's a pretty name. I am Jake Morrison. Been ranching this land for about 15 years now. Maria nodded, filing away this information. 15 years was a long time to stay in one place, to build something lasting. She envied that kind of stability, that sense of belonging somewhere. You been in Texas long? Jake asked. The question was casual, but Maria sensed the concern beneath it. She wondered how much her appearance gave away. The hollow look around her eyes, the way her clothes hung loose from too many missed meals, the careful way she held herself as if expecting disappointment. 6 months, she said. Before that, California for 1 year. Before that, China. Long way from home. Jake observed. This is home now, Maria replied automatically, though the words felt hollow. Home was supposed to be a place where you belonged, where people knew your name and cared whether you lived or died. This vast country still felt foreign to her, despite her determination to make it work. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the truck eating up miles of empty road. Maria found herself studying Jake's profile when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy that she hadn't encountered in a long time. His hands on the steering wheel were steady, competent. These were hands that built things, fixed things, made things grow. There she is, Jake said suddenly, and Maria followed his gaze to see a collection of buildings in the distance. The Morrison Ranch wasn't fancy, but it was clearly well-maintained. A 2-story house, painted white with green shutters, sat at the center, surrounded by various outbuildings. A barn, what looked like a workshop, and several smaller structures Maria couldn't identify. Horses grazed in a nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the morning sun. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Maria felt a strange sensation in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it as longing. This place looked like home was supposed to look settled, peaceful, cared for. It was the kind of place she had dreamed about during the long months of uncertainty, the kind of place where a person could put down roots and grow something beautiful. Jake parked near the front porch and turned off the engine. Well, here we are, he said. Come on in, and I'll fix you something to eat. Maria climbed out of the truck, her legs unsteady after the short ride. Up close, the ranch house was even more appealing. The porch wrapped around at least 2 sides of the building, with rocking chairs positioned to catch the evening breeze. Flower boxes beneath the windows held blooms that were clearly tended with care. Someone loved this place enough to make it beautiful. Did your wife plant the flowers? Maria asked as they climbed the porch steps. Jake's hand paused on the screen door handle. Yeah, she did. I've been trying to keep them up the way she would have wanted. Not sure I'm doing much of a job, but I figure she'd be upset if I let them die. The raw honesty in his voice made Maria's throat tight. She understood about keeping the dead alive through small acts of remembrance, about honoring love that no longer had an object. The inside of the house was as welcoming as the outside. The living room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace and bookshelves lined with well-worn volumes. Family photographs covered the mantel and side tables, pictures of Jake and a woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, images that spoke of years of shared happiness. Bathroom's down the hall, if you'd like to freshen up, Jake said, setting her suitcase by the front door. I'll get started on breakfast. Maria found the bathroom and stared at herself in a mirror above the sink. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, thin, tired, with dark circles under her eyes and hair that needed washing. When had she stopped caring about her appearance? When had survival become so consuming that she'd forgotten about dignity? She washed her face and hands with soap that smelled like lavender, combed her fingers through her hair, and tried to make herself presentable. It wasn't much, but it was a start. When she emerged, the kitchen was filled with the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing. Jake stood at the stove, his movements efficient and practiced. A plate was already set at the small kitchen table, along with a glass of orange juice and a steaming cup of coffee. "Sit," Jake said without turning around. "Food will be ready in just a minute." Maria sat, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. The kitchen was clearly the heart of the house, with copper pots hanging from hooks, herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill, and a calendar on the wall marked with notations in neat handwriting. "This is too much," Maria protested as Jake set a plate in front of her loaded with scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and hash browns. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" Jake asked, settling across from her with his own plate. Maria couldn't remember. Food had become fuel, something to be consumed quickly and cheaply when it was available at all. The idea of sitting at a table, of eating food prepared with care, felt almost foreign. She took a bite of the scrambled eggs and nearly cried. They were perfect, fluffy, and seasoned with something that reminded her of home. Without meaning to, she began eating faster, her body recognizing sustenance and demanding more. "Slow down there," Jake said gently. "Food's not going anywhere." Maria forced herself to eat more slowly, embarrassed by her desperation. "I'm sorry. I haven't. It's been difficult lately. No need to apologize. We've all been hungry before." But Maria doubted that Jake Morrison had ever been truly hungry, had ever gone days with nothing but stale crackers and hope. Still, his tone held no judgment, only understanding. "Tell me about yourself," Jake said as they ate. "What kind of work do you do?" "Cleaning houses mostly. Some restaurant work when I can find it. I have education from China, but here," she shrugged, the gesture encompassing all the complications of credentials that meant nothing in this new country. "What kind of education?" "Accounting, business management. But English is still hard sometimes, and employers, they want American experience." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That's a shame. Seems like we're wasting a lot of good minds that way." His matter-of-fact acceptance of her qualifications surprised Maria. Most people either didn't believe her or dismissed her foreign education as inferior. Jake simply accepted what she told him as truth. After breakfast, Jake showed her to a small guest room upstairs. It was simply furnished with a single bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the pastures where horses grazed peacefully. "You can rest here for a while," Jake said. "I've got some work to do around the ranch, but I'll drive you to town this afternoon if that's what you want." Maria sat on the edge of the bed, testing its softness. It had been months since she'd slept on anything more comfortable than a thin mattress on the floor. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. Jake leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "I guess because someone needs to. This world's got enough cruelty in it without good folks adding to the pile." After he left, Maria lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Exhaustion pulled at her limbs, but her mind raced with questions and possibilities. This man, this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one morning than she'd received in months, was offering her exactly what she'd been praying for. Help without strings, compassion without cost. But Maria had learned to be suspicious of gifts that seemed too good to be true. What did Jake Morrison really want? What was he hoping to gain from helping her? Experience had taught her that everyone wanted something, even if they didn't say so up front. As she drifted toward sleep, Maria tried to hold onto her wariness, her carefully constructed defenses. But the comfortable bed, the full stomach, and the lingering scent of lavender soap conspired against her vigilance. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Maria Chun allowed herself to feel safe. Outside her window, Jake Morrison went about his daily chores, checking on the horses and mending a section of fence that had come loose. But his thoughts kept returning to the small woman now sleeping in his guest room, to the careful way she'd eaten breakfast as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. He'd told her about Sarah, about kindness being like water in the desert. What he hadn't said was that sometimes the person dying of thirst was the one offering the water. Since Sarah's death, Jake had thrown himself into work, into maintaining the ranch, and keeping busy enough that grief couldn't catch him. But loneliness had a way of seeping in during the quiet moments, reminding him of all the ways life had become smaller without love to fill it. Maybe helping Maria was as much about his own needs as hers. Maybe they were both lost souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Or maybe he was just a rancher who'd been raised to help folks in need, and she was someone who desperately needed helping. Either way, Jake thought as he hammered a new nail into the fence post, it felt like the right thing to do. And in a world that seemed increasingly short on right things, that would have to be enough. Maria woke to the sound of horses whinnying in the distance, and afternoon sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the room too peaceful, the air too clean. Then it all came rushing back, the highway, the pickup truck, Jake Morrison, and his unexpected kindness. She sat up slowly, her body protesting after the deepest sleep she'd had in months. The clock on the nightstand read 2:30 p.m. She had slept for nearly 4 hours, something that would have been impossible in the trailer park where sirens and shouting neighbors kept everyone on edge. Through the window, she could see Jake working in the distance, leading a magnificent black horse from the barn to a fenced area. Even from this distance, she could tell the animal was limping. Jake moved with patience and gentleness, his body language speaking of experience and compassion. Maria found her way downstairs, following the scent of something delicious coming from the kitchen. A pot of soup simmered on the stove, and fresh bread cooled on the counter. A note in neat handwriting lay beside a glass of iced tea. Help yourself to lunch. Back in an hour. Jake. The simple gesture touched something deep in Maria's chest. When was the last time someone had anticipated her needs, had cared enough to leave food for her without being asked? She ladled soup into a bowl, chicken and vegetables that tasted like comfort itself, and ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. Afterward, she washed her dishes and explored the house, drawn by curiosity and the need to understand the man who had taken her in. The living room held more clues about Jake and his late wife. Wedding photos showed them young and laughing, his arm around a petite blonde woman whose eyes sparkled with joy. Other pictures traced their life together. Anniversaries, holidays, quiet moments that spoke of deep love. One photograph made Maria pause. It showed Jake and Sarah standing in front of this very house, but it looked different, newer, with fresh paint and landscaping that was just beginning to take root. They both looked so young, so full of hope for the future they were building together. That was taken the day we moved in. Jake's voice came from behind her. Maria turned, embarrassed at being caught studying his personal things. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. No harm done. Jake set his hat on a side table and joined her in front of the mantel. Sarah always said this house would be perfect for raising kids. We had it all planned out, 2 or 3 little ones running around, maybe a dog or 2. Life had other plans, I guess. The sadness in his voice was carefully controlled, but Maria could hear it underneath. You never had children? Sarah couldn't carry them to term. We tried for years, went to doctors, specialists. Nothing worked. She always said it was God's way of telling us we were meant to love each other so much we didn't need anyone else. Jake's fingers traced the edge of a photo frame. I used to think that was enough. Now I wonder if maybe we should have adopted, given some kid who needed a home the love we had to spare. Maria understood the weight of unfulfilled dreams, of paths not taken. She sounds like a wise woman. She was smart as a whip, too. Had her master's degree in education, taught at the elementary school in town. Kids loved her. She had this way of making everyone feel special, like they mattered. Jake picked up a photo of Sarah surrounded by smiling children in graduation caps. After she died, the school named their library after her. Sarah Morrison Memorial Library. She would have liked that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who understood loss. Maria wanted to tell him about her own grief, about the family she'd left behind, and the dreams that had died with them. But the words felt too heavy to lift. You mentioned you were going to town, she said instead. I should get my things. Jake turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. You don't have to leave today if you don't want to. I know you said you needed to get to town, but if you're not in a hurry, I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Truth is, it's nice having someone else around the place. It gets pretty quiet here by myself. Maria studied his face, searching for hidden motives, but found only honesty. I have nowhere to go in town. No job. No place to stay. I thought maybe the bus station. Where would you go? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maria didn't have an answer because there wasn't one. She had exhausted her options, burned her bridges, used up the last of her hope. I don't know, she admitted. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. I've got a proposition for you, if you're interested. Maria's body tensed automatically. Here it comes, she thought. The catch. The price for his kindness. I need help around here, Jake continued. Housekeeping, cooking, that sort of thing. I'm pretty hopeless at it, truth be told. Been living on frozen dinners and takeout since Sarah passed. The place is falling apart without a woman's touch. You're offering me a job? Room, board, and fair wages for honest work. You'd have your own space, your privacy. No strings attached, just a business arrangement between two people who could help each other out. Maria stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. You don't know anything about me. I could be a criminal, a drug addict, anything. Jake shrugged. Could be. But I don't think you are. Call it intuition. That's not very smart business sense. Maybe not. But I learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to take chances on people. Sarah taught me that. She was always bringing home strays, cats, dogs, students who needed extra help. She said everyone deserved a chance to prove they were better than their circumstances. The offer was too good to be real. Maria searched for the trap, the hidden cost, the inevitable disappointment. What if I steal from you? Then I'll have made a mistake. But I don't think I will. What if I can't do the work to your satisfaction? Then we'll figure something else out. What if, Maria? Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking a risk at all. You need a place to stay and work you could be proud of. I need help keeping this place from falling down around my ears. Seems like we might be able to help each other. Maria felt tears gathering behind her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had learned not to cry in front of strangers, not to show weakness that could be used against her. But Jake's unexpected kindness threatened to crack the protective shell she had built around her heart. Why would you trust me? She whispered. Because I think you're a good person who's had some bad luck. And because Sarah would tan my hide if she knew I let someone in need walk away from this place without trying to help. The mention of his wife's approval seemed to seal something for Jake. Maria could see the decision crystallizing in his face, the careful consideration giving way to certainty. Think about it, he said. You don't have to decide right now. Why don't you stay tonight, see how it feels, and we can talk more tomorrow. Before Maria could respond, a loud whinny from outside interrupted them. Jake's head snapped toward the window, his expression immediately shifting to concern. That's thunder, he said, moving quickly toward the door. Something's wrong. Maria followed him outside, where they could see the black horse she'd noticed earlier pacing frantically in the corral. The animal was clearly in distress, favoring his left front leg and tossing his head with anxiety. What's wrong with him? Maria asked as Jake vaulted over the fence with surprising agility. Stepped in a hole this morning and twisted his leg. I thought it was just a minor strain, but it looks worse. Jake approached the horse slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. Easy there, boy. Let me take a look. Maria watched in fascination as Jake examined the horse's leg with gentle, practiced hands. Thunder calmed under his touch, though the animal's eyes still showed pain and fear. I need to call Doc Martinez, Jake said grimly. This might be more serious than I thought. Is there anything I can do to help? Jake looked surprised, as if he'd forgotten she was there. You know anything about horses? A little. My uncle had horses in China. I used to help care for them when I was young. Can you keep him calm while I make the call? Just talk to him, keep him still. Maria climbed the fence and approached Thunder carefully. The horse's ears flicked toward her as she began speaking in soft Mandarin, words her uncle had taught her years ago. The familiar sounds seemed to soothe the animal, and he lowered his head toward her outstretched hand. Well, I'll be damned, Jake muttered, pulling out his cell phone. He hasn't let anyone but me near him since Sarah died. While Jake called the veterinarian, Maria continued talking to Thunder, her hands moving over his neck in slow, calming strokes. The horse's breathing gradually steadied, and some of the tension left his body. Maria found herself remembering afternoons spent in her uncle's stable, the peace she'd found in caring for animals that asked for nothing but gentleness. Doc says he can't make it out until tomorrow morning, Jake said, returning to the corral. We need to keep Thunder as still as possible until then. I can stay with him tonight, Maria offered. Make sure he doesn't put weight on the leg. Jake stared at her for a long moment. You do that? For a horse you just met? Animals feel pain the same as people. He's scared and hurting. Someone should be with him. Something shifted in Jake's expression, a recognition of kindness that matched his own. Sarah would have said the exact same thing. They spent the evening taking turns watching Thunder, Maria's presence seeming to calm the horse in a way that surprised them both. Jake brought blankets and coffee, and they settled in a lawn chairs beside the corral, taking shifts but never really leaving the animal alone. You're good with him, Jake observed during one of their conversations. Most people are afraid of horses Thunder size. Fear makes animals more nervous. If you're calm, they feel it. Where did you learn that? My uncle taught me. He said animals are honest in ways people sometimes aren't. They don't lie about what they need or who they are. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Sarah used to say something similar. She preferred animals to most people, truth be told. Said they were better judges of character. As the night wore on, their conversation drifted from horses to more personal topics. Maria found herself sharing stories about her childhood in China, about her parents, and the dreams that had brought her to America. Jake talked about the ranch, about building a life with Sarah, and the loneliness that had settled over everything after her death. Do you ever think about going back? Jake asked. To China, I mean. Sometimes. But there's nothing left for me there. My parents are gone. My brother died, trying to get to America. This is my home now, even if it doesn't always feel like it. What will make it feel like home? Maria considered the question, watching Thunder doze fitfully in the moonlight. Belonging somewhere. Having people who know my name, who would miss me if I was gone. Purpose. What kind of purpose? I want to build something. In China, I dreamed of having my own business, of being successful in a way my parents could be proud of. But here, I just try to survive each day. Jake was quiet for a while, and Maria worried she had said too much, revealed too much of her ambition and disappointment. But when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. You know, Sarah always wanted to start a horse therapy program, work with kids who had problems, use horses to teach them confidence and responsibility. She had it all planned out, but we never had the money to get it going. That sounds wonderful. Maybe it still could be. I've got the land, the horses, the basic setup. What I don't have is someone who understands animals and people both. Someone with business sense who could help make it work. Maria's heart began to beat faster. Was he suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? I'm not a therapist, she said carefully. No, but you're educated, you understand animals, and you've got the kind of determination it takes to build something from nothing. Plus, Thunder likes you, and he doesn't like anybody. As if summoned by his name, Thunder lifted his head and nickered softly toward Maria. She reached through the fence to stroke his nose, marveling at the connection she felt to this magnificent, hurting creature. You're talking about a partnership, she said. I'm talking about possibility. Sarah's dream, your skills, my resources. Maybe we could honor her memory and give you the purpose you're looking for at the same time. The offer was so far beyond anything Maria had dared hope for that she couldn't quite process it. A home, meaningful work, the chance to build something lasting. It was everything she had crossed an ocean to find. I would need to learn about therapy programs, about regulations, about how to work with children, she said, her mind already racing with possibilities. We'd start slow, figure out together. Sarah left behind all her research, her plans. We could build on what she started. Maria looked at Jake in the moonlight. This man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was praying. Why would you do this? Share Sarah's dream with a stranger. Because dreams don't die with the dreamers if someone else is willing to carry them forward. And because I think Sarah would like you. I think she'd want her ideas to live on through someone who understood what it meant to fight for a better life. Thunder whinnied softly, as if adding his approval to the conversation. Maria felt something loosening in her chest, a knot of fear and desperation that had been there so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I'll need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. But Maria, I hope you'll say yes. I think we could do something really special here. As dawn broke over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Maria Chun sat beside an injured horse and contemplated a future she had never dared imagine. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt the stirring of something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Dr. Martinez arrived at sunrise, a weathered Mexican-American man whose gentle hands and quiet manner immediately put Thunder at ease. Maria watched from the fence as he examined the horse's injured leg, his face growing increasingly grave as his examination progressed. "It's not as bad as it could be," he finally announced, "but it's not good either. Strained ligament, some swelling. He'll need complete rest for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. No weight on that leg at all." Jake's face showed his concern. Thunder wasn't just any horse. He was Sarah's favorite, the one she'd trained from a colt, the one that carried her on long rides across the ranch when she needed to think or grieve or simply feel free. "Will he recover completely?" Maria asked, surprising herself by speaking up. Dr. Martinez looked at her with interest. "You are Maria Chun. I'm staying here temporarily." Maria helped keep Thunder calm all night, Jake added. "She's got away with animals." "That's important," Dr. Martinez said, nodding approvingly at Maria. "Healing isn't just physical. Animals need to feel safe, cared for. Stress can slow recovery as much as any injury." He turned back to Jake. "With proper rest and the right care, Thunder should make a full recovery. But someone needs to be with him consistently, make sure he doesn't try to put weight on that leg." After the veterinarian left, Jake and Maria stood looking at Thunder, who seemed calmer now that he understood help had arrived. "I meant what I said last night," Jake said quietly, "about the therapy program. But even if you decide that's not what you want, I could use your help with Thunder. He trusts you." Maria felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Everything in her life had led to this moment. The journey from China, the struggles and disappointments, the long walk down a Texas highway that had brought her to Jake Morrison's door. "If I stay," she said carefully, "it has to be as an equal partner in whatever we build. Not as hired help, not out of charity. I want to contribute something meaningful." Jake's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Sarah always said the best partnerships were between people who challenged each other to be better than they thought they could be. "Tell me about her plans for the therapy program." They spent the morning in Sarah's study, a cozy room lined with books on education, psychology, and equine therapy. Sarah had been methodical in her research, filling binders with information about existing programs, state regulations, funding possibilities, and detailed plans for facilities and curriculum. She wanted to start with at-risk kids, Jake explained, pulling out a folder thick with notes. Children who'd been through trauma, kids in foster care, young people who'd lost their way. She believed horses could teach them things that traditional therapy couldn't: responsibility, trust, confidence. Maria studied the carefully organized materials, seeing the passionate intelligence behind every page. She thought of everything: building plans, insurance requirements, staffing needs. "This is years of work." She started researching right after we moved to the ranch. Said someday we'd have the resources to make it happen. Jake's voice grew quiet. Someday never came for her, but maybe it can still happen. Over the next several days, as Thunder slowly healed under Maria's watchful care, they dove deeper into Sarah's vision. Maria's business background proved invaluable as she identified funding sources Sarah hadn't considered, streamlined the operational plans, and suggested modifications that would make the program more financially sustainable. "You could start with a small pilot program," Maria suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, Thunder grazing carefully in the nearby paddock. "Maybe 6 kids to begin with. Prove the concept, build a track record, then expand." "How will we find the kids?" "I've been thinking about that. What if we partnered with the schools?" "You said Sarah taught at the elementary school. They would know which children might benefit from this kind of program." Jake nodded slowly. "Mrs. Patterson is still the principal there. She and Sarah were close. She might be willing to help us identify candidates." The more they planned, the more excited Maria became. For the first time since arriving in America, she felt her education and skills being valued, her ideas taken seriously. Jake listened to her suggestions with respect, building on her thoughts rather than dismissing them. But it wasn't just the work that drew her in. It was the way Jake's face lit up when he talked about helping children, the way he spoke of Sarah's dream with such reverence and determination. It was the gentleness she observed in his interactions with the horses, the patience he showed when explaining ranch operations to her. And it was the way he treated her, not as a foreign woman to be pitted or suspected, but as an equal with valuable contributions to make. "There's something I should tell you," Maria said one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She had been staying for a week now, falling into a comfortable routine of caring for Thunder, maintaining the house, and planning their potential future. Jake looked up from the vegetables he was chopping. What's that? I'm not legal. The words hung in the air between them. Maria had been dreading this confession, knowing it could change everything. Jake's hands stilled on the cutting board, but his expression remained calm. Your visa expired? I never had a proper visa. I came here on a tourist visa and stayed. I've been trying to find a way to get legal status, but it's complicated and expensive, and I don't have the right connections. Jake set down his knife and turned to face her fully. How long? 3 years. And you're telling me this because? Because you deserve to know who you're partnering with. If we do this therapy program, if we work together, you need to understand the risks. I could be deported. The government could shut down anything with my name on it. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Maria braced herself for the inevitable withdrawal, the careful distance that would replace the growing friendship between them. Sarah's cousin Miguel had the same problem. Jake said finally. Came here when he was 15, stayed after his student visa expired. Took him 12 years to get his citizenship, but he did it. He's a doctor now in Houston. You're not angry? Angry? Why would I be angry? You didn't choose to be illegal. You chose to be brave. There's a difference. Maria felt tears gathering in her eyes despite her efforts to control them. Most people don't see it that way. Most people haven't walked in your shoes. Besides, there are all kinds of laws in this country. Some of them make sense, some of them don't. My grandfather used to say that a good person's first duty is to be human, and their second duty is to be a citizen. That night, as Maria lay in the guest room that was beginning to feel like home, she thought about Jake's words. She had spent so long hiding, so long feeling ashamed of her legal status, that she had forgotten it was possible for someone to see her as human first. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Maria was in the barn, checking on Thunder's progress, when she heard vehicles in the driveway. Through the open door, she could see a sheriff's car and a sedan with government plates. Her blood turned to ice. Immigration enforcement. Somehow they had found her. She looked around frantically, calculating escape routes, but it was too late. 2 men in uniform were already walking toward the barn, with Jake beside them, his face grim, but not hostile. Maria, Jake called out. Could you come here for a minute? Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She walked slowly toward the group, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. This is Maria Chun, Jake said to the officers. Maria, this is Sheriff Rodriguez and Agent Gonzalez from IC. Maria's knees nearly buckled. This was it. The end of everything. Miss Chun, Agent Gonzalez said, his voice professional but not unkind. We're here because Mr. Morrison contacted us about your situation. Maria's eyes flew to Jake's face, confusion and betrayal warring in her chest. He had turned her in. After everything, after her honesty and trust, he had called immigration. Now hold on, Jake said quickly, seeing her expression. It's not what you think. Mr. Morrison has petitioned for you to receive legal status under the U visa program. Agent Gonzalez continued. He's testified that you've been a victim of trafficking and exploitation, and that you've been cooperating in the investigation of crimes against other undocumented workers. Maria stared at them in confusion. I don't understand. Sheriff Rodriguez stepped forward. Your former employer, Mrs. Henderson? She's been running an illegal operation, exploiting undocumented workers, paying below minimum wage, threatening deportation when workers complained about unsafe conditions. Mr. Morrison's testimony about your situation helped us build a case against her. The U visa is for victims of certain crimes who have been helpful to law enforcement, Agent Gonzalez explained. It provides temporary legal status and a path to permanent residency. Mr. Morrison's testimony, combined with your willingness to cooperate in our investigation, makes you eligible. Maria felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from fear to hope. You mean, I could become legal? It's not automatic, Agent Gonzalez cautioned. There's paperwork, interviews, background checks. But, yes, if your application is approved, you'd receive legal status and eventually be eligible for permanent residency. After the officers left, Maria sat on the porch steps, trying to process what had just happened. Jake sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. You researched immigration law, she said, not really asking. I made some calls, talked to Miguel's lawyer, learned what options might exist. The U visa seemed like the best fit for your situation. You did this without telling me. I wanted to make sure it was possible before I got your hopes up. I know what disappointment feels like. Maria turned to look at him, this man who continued to surprise her with his depth and compassion. What if it doesn't work? What if they deny the application? Then we'll figure out something else. But, Maria, you can't live in fear forever. Sometimes you have to take a chance on the system working the way it's supposed to. That evening, they celebrated quietly with a dinner of homemade pasta and wine from a bottle Jake had been saving for a special occasion. Thunder watched from his paddock, his leg healing steadily under Maria's devoted care. If the visa comes through, Maria said as they sat on the porch afterward, if I can stay legally, I want to make this therapy program happen. Not just for Sarah's memory, but because I think we could really help people. Even if it takes years to build, even if it's hard work with no guarantee of success. Especially then, I've learned that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Jake raised his wine glass in a toast to Sarah's dream and to new beginnings. As they clinked glasses under the Texas stars, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever paperwork and bureaucracy and setbacks awaited them, she would face them from a position of strength. She had found more than legal status and work. She had found purpose, partnership, and something that felt remarkably like home. In the distance, thunder nickered softly, as if adding his approval to their plans. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility, like the vast Texas sky that seemed to go on forever. 6 months later, the Morrison Ranch looked transformed. What had once been a collection of functional farm buildings now showed signs of careful planning and hopeful preparation. A new fence enclosed what would become the therapy arena, and fresh paint brightened the barn that would house the program horses. Maria stood in the doorway of the main building, clipboard in hand, checking items off an endless list. Her U visa had been approved 3 months earlier, and with legal status came the freedom to dream bigger than mere survival. The therapy program, now officially called Sarah's Hope Equine Therapy Center, was set to welcome its first group of children in 2 weeks. The insurance adjuster is coming Monday, Jake announced, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. The morning ritual had become one of Maria's favorite parts of the day, planning and problem-solving together as the ranch came alive around them. Good. And Mrs. Patterson confirmed 6 children for our pilot program. 3 from the elementary school, 2 from a middle school, and 1 referral from the county social services department. Jake handed her a cup and leaned against the doorframe beside her. Nervous, terrified, Maria admitted. What if we can't help them? What if the horses don't connect with the children the way we hope? What if I make mistakes because my English still isn't perfect, or because I don't understand American children well enough? Then, we'll figure it out as we go. Nobody expects perfection in the first month, Maria. We're trying something new, something important. That means there'll be mistakes and learning and adjusting along the way. Maria nodded, but her anxiety remained. Over the past months, she had thrown herself into learning everything possible about equine therapy, attending workshops, reading research, even spending a week at an established program in Colorado to observe their methods. But knowledge felt different from practice, and the weight of responsibility for vulnerable children pressed heavily on her shoulders. Tell me about the social services referral again, she said, returning to familiar territory, the detailed planning that helped calm her nerves. Jake's expression grew serious. 12-year-old boy named Carlos Mendoza. He's been in 4 foster homes in 2 years. The social worker says he's not a bad kid, just angry and untrusting. His last placement failed because he ran away 3 times, and they think horses might help. The social worker, Elena Vasquez, thinks traditional therapy isn't reaching him. She's hoping that working with animals might break through some of his defenses. Maria made a note on her clipboard. Carlos would require special attention, special patience. She had read about children like him in Sarah's research, kids whose ability to trust had been damaged by adults who were supposed to protect them. What about the others? Amy Peterson, 8 years old, selective mutism since her father died in a car accident 6 months ago. Tommy Walsh, 10, struggles with anger management and impulse control after witnessing domestic violence. Sarah Kim, 11, severe anxiety following her parents' bitter divorce. The Rodriguez twins, Marcus and Miguel, both 9, having trouble adjusting after moving here from El Salvador. Each child represented a story of loss or trauma, a young person struggling to make sense of a world that had proven unreliable or cruel. The magnitude of their trust humbled Maria. These families were entrusting their most precious possessions to an untested program run by a Chinese immigrant and a widowed rancher. Dr. Miller is still willing to consult? Maria asked, referring to the child psychologist they'd partnered with. Absolutely. She'll be here for the intake interviews next week, and she's committed to being on-site every other session to start with. A truck rumbled up the driveway, interrupting their conversation. Maria recognized the vehicle as belonging to Tom Henderson, their local feed supplier, and the person who connected them with several of the program horses now living in their expanded barn. "Morning, Jake, Maria," Tom called as he climbed out of his truck. "Brought those supplements Thunder's been needing, and I got news about another horse that might work for your program." Thunder, now fully recovered from his injury, had become the unofficial mascot of Sarah's Hope. His gentle nature and Jake's patient training had transformed him into an ideal therapy horse. Calm, responsive, and seemingly intuitive about human emotions. "What kind of horse?" Maria asked, walking over to greet Tom. "Quarter horse mare, about 15 years old. Belongs to the Johnson family over in Cedar Creek. Their daughter went off to college, and they're looking to rehome Belle. She's been a 4-H horse for years, used to working with kids." Jake and Maria exchanged glances. They currently had 4 horses designated for the therapy program, but their long-term plan called for 6 to handle the rotating schedule they designed. "I'll give them a call," Jake said. "If she's good with children, she might be exactly what we need." After Tom left, Maria and Jake continued their daily routine of caring for the horses and reviewing program details. Maria had discovered an unexpected joy in the physical work of ranch life. Feeding horses, mucking stalls, mending fences, tasks that might have seemed mundane now felt purposeful, connected to the larger goal of healing. "I got a letter from my brother yesterday," Maria said as they worked together to repair a gate hinge. Jake looked up, surprised. "I thought you said your brother died." "Different brother. Older brother, Wei. He lives in Vancouver now, got his Canadian citizenship last year. He heard about the program through mutual friends." "That's wonderful. Are you thinking of visiting him?" Maria set down her wrench and leaned against the gate post. "He wants to invest in Sarah's Hope. Says he has money saved, and he believes in what we're doing." The offer was generous and unexpected, but it also complicated Maria's feelings about the program. From the beginning, she and Jake had been equal partners, sharing expenses and decisions. Wei's investment would provide financial security, but might change the dynamic she'd come to value. "What did you tell him?" "That I needed to talk to my partner first." Jake smiled at her use of the word partner, a designation they'd grown into over months of shared work and mutual respect. "What do you think? Do we need the money? We could operate the current program with what we have. But if we want to expand, if we want to add horses and staff and maybe even build residential facilities someday." Maria trailed off, imagining possibilities they discussed but hadn't dared plan for. "What would your brother want in return?" "He says nothing. Just the satisfaction of helping kids and honoring what our parents taught us about giving back to the community." Jake considered this, his practical mind working through implications. It might be good to have family involved, someone who understands your perspective and supports what you're trying to build. That evening, Maria called Wei from the kitchen landline while Jake worked in his study. Her brother's voice sounded older than she remembered, weathered by his own journey of immigration and adaptation. "Little sister," he said in Mandarin, using the childhood nickname that always made her feel loved and protected. "Tell me about this place you've found." Maria described the ranch, the program, her partnership with Jake. She found herself switching between Mandarin and English as she struggled to convey not just the facts, but the emotions, the sense of purpose and belonging that had grown from desperate circumstances. "This man, this Jake," Wei said. "You trust him?" "With my life," Maria answered without hesitation. "And he trusts you?" "Yes. We make decisions together. We share the work. We respect each other's ideas." "Good. In business, trust is more valuable than money. But it sounds like you need money too." Wei's investment, $50,000, would indeed transform their possibilities. They could purchase additional horses, hire qualified staff, and begin planning for the expansion that lived in Sarah's original vision. "There's something else," Wei added before they ended the call. "I'm getting married next month." Lynn, and I want you to be there." The invitation filled Maria with joy and sadness in equal measure. She wanted desperately to celebrate her brother's happiness, to meet the woman who had captured his heart. But leaving the ranch, even temporarily, felt impossible with the program launching so soon. "I don't know if I can get away," she said. "Think about it. Jake seems like a good man. I bet he would understand the importance of family." After hanging up, Maria found Jake in Sarah's study, reading through intake forms for their first group of children. The lamplight cast shadows across his weathered features, emphasizing the concentration and concern with which he approached each child's story. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking up as she entered. Maria told him about Way's investment offer and wedding invitation. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "50,000 would change everything for us," he said finally. But this is your decision. Way is your family. And this program is your dream as much as Sarah's. You should do what feels right. I can't leave right before we start. These children are counting on us. The children will still need us when you get back. And maybe meeting your family, seeing you happy and celebrated would be good for the program long term. Kids can sense when the adults in their lives are complete people, not just helpers. Maria studied his face, looking for signs of resentment or worry about being left with the entire responsibility. Instead, she saw only encouragement and understanding. "You would manage everything alone? Dr. Miller will be here. Tom Henderson has offered to help with the horses, and Mrs. Patterson said she could assist with intake procedures if needed. Besides, it's only a week, right? 5 days. But Jake, what if something goes wrong? What if I come back and the program has fallen apart?" Jake stood and moved to the window that looked out over the pastures where their therapy horses grazed peacefully in the moonlight. "Maria, for months you've been worried about every detail, planning for every possible problem. But at some point, you have to trust that you've built something strong enough to survive imperfection." His words echoed something Sarah had written in one of her notebooks. The goal isn't to create a perfect program, but to create a loving one. Love is resilient in ways that perfection never can be. "I'll call Way tomorrow and accept both offers," Maria decided. "The investment and the wedding invitation. Good. And Maria? I think Sarah would approve. She always said that family was the foundation everything else was built on." 2 weeks later, Maria stood in the Vancouver airport, wearing a blue dress Way had bought her, and carrying a small suitcase packed for celebration rather than desperation. The contrast to her arrival in America couldn't have been starker. This time, she traveled with legal documents, financial security, and the confidence of someone who belonged somewhere. Way looked older, but happier than she remembered, his face showing the contentment of a man who had found his place in the world. His fiancée, Lynn, was a quiet woman with kind eyes and the graceful movements of someone who worked with her hands. A potter, Way explained, whose studio had become their meeting place. "Tell me about this partnership," Lynn said during their first dinner together. "This Jake who trusted you when no one else would." Maria found herself describing not just Jake's actions, but his character. The gentleness with horses, the patience with her learning curve, the way he honored his late wife's memory while building something new. "You love him," Way observed, his directness startling Maria into silence. We're business partners. Friends. Little sister, I've heard you talk about work before. This is not how you sound when discussing business." Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks. Had her feelings become so obvious? She had been so focused on building the program, on proving herself worthy of Jake's trust, that she hadn't allowed herself to examine the growing affection she felt for him. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "He loved his wife deeply. I see in the way he talks about her, the way he's kept her things, the way he honors her dreams. I would never want to compete with that." "Who says you're competing?" Lynn asked gently. "Maybe you're continuing." The wedding ceremony was small and beautiful, held in a community garden where Lynn displayed some of her pottery among the flowers. As Maria watched her brother promise his life to this woman who clearly cherished him, she thought about different kinds of love: the passionate romance of youth, the steady companionship of shared purpose, the quiet affection that grows from respect and daily kindness. What did she feel for Jake Morrison? It wasn't the desperate need she'd once thought was love or the romantic fantasy that had sustained her through lonely nights. It was something steadier and more complex, a deep appreciation for his integrity, a desire for his happiness, a sense that their lives had become intertwined in ways that transcended simple partnership. On her last day in Vancouver, Wei and Lin took her to visit Lin's pottery studio. The space was filled with beautiful, functional pieces, bowls and plates and vases that spoke of skill developed over years of practice. Each piece starts as a lump of clay, Lin explained, demonstrating her wheel technique. You have to be patient, let it tell you what it wants to become. Force it too much, and it collapses. Don't guide it enough, and it lacks purpose. Maria watched Lin's hands shape the clay with gentle pressure and careful attention. Is that what love is like too? Lin smiled. The best kind, yes. Partnership love, life-building love. It requires patience and attention and the willingness to let each person become who they're meant to be. When Maria's plane landed in Houston, Jake was waiting at the airport with a sign that read, "Welcome home," in both English and what he'd attempted to write in Chinese characters. The sight of him, rumpled from the long drive, holding his handmade sign with obvious pride, made her heart swell with affection and gratitude. "How did the first week go?" she asked as they drove back to the ranch. "Better than expected." Carlos actually smiled twice. Amy spoke to Thunder in whispers, and the Rodriguez twins fought over who got to feed which horse. Dr. Miller says she's never seen kids engage so quickly with a therapy intervention. "And you? How did you manage?" Jake glanced at her, his expression warm. "I managed fine, but the ranch felt empty without you. The horses missed you too." Thunder kept looking toward the house like he was wondering where you'd gone. As they pulled into the familiar driveway, Maria felt a rush of emotion she hadn't expected. This place, these buildings and fences and pastures had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. And the man beside her had become, what? Partner, friend, something more complex than she had words for. "Jake," she said as they sat in the truck, looking at the ranch in the fading light. "Wei asked me something in Vancouver that I haven't been able to stop thinking about." "What was that?" "He asked if I loved you." Jake's hands stilled on the steering wheel. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and fear in equal measure. "And what did you tell him?" Jake asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I told him it didn't matter because you loved Sarah." Jake turned to look at her fully, his storm gray eyes serious. "Maria, loving Sarah doesn't mean I can't love anyone else. She wouldn't have wanted that for me, and I'm finally understanding it's not what I want for myself either." The confession hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Maria felt her heart racing with the same mixture of hope and terror she'd experienced standing on the roadside 6 months earlier, not knowing what kind of man might stop for her. "I love you too," she whispered. "But I'm scared of changing what we've built, scared of risking the partnership and the program and everything we've worked for." Jake reached across the space between them and took her hand in his calloused grip. "What if loving each other makes us stronger partners? What if Sarah's hope succeeds, not in spite of our feelings, but because of them?" As they sat holding hands in the gathering dusk, Maria thought about Lin's words about pottery, about patience, and guidance, about letting things become what they were meant to be. Maybe love, like clay, required a delicate balance of pressure and freedom, shaping and acceptance. "I want to try," she said finally. "If you're willing to be patient while we figure it out." "I've been patient this long," Jake replied, lifting her hand to his lips. "I can be patient a while longer." Above them, the first stars appeared in the Texas sky, witnesses to another beginning in a place that had already seen so many transformations. In the distance, horses moved peacefully through their pastures, and somewhere in town, 6 children waited for Monday morning and another chance to heal. 2 years later, Maria Chin Morrison stood in the main arena of Sarah's Hope Equine Therapy Center, watching 12-year-old Carlos Mendoza lead Thunder through a series of ground exercises with the confidence of a natural horseman. The angry, untrusting boy who had arrived with clenched fists and suspicious eyes had transformed into a young man who smiled easily and had been foster family free for over a year, living with the Hendersons, Tom's family, who had fallen in love with his determination and dry sense of humor. "He's doing remarkable work, Dr. Miller observed, standing beside Maria with a clipboard full of progress notes. 6 months ago, he couldn't be in the same room with an adult male without becoming defensive. Now he's teaching the newer kids how to brush the horses." Maria nodded, pride and satisfaction warming her chest. Carlos wasn't the only success story. Amy Peterson, now 10, had progressed from selective mutism to leading group discussions about horse care. The Rodriguez twins had found their confidence and were teaching other Spanish-speaking children who joined the program. Sarah Kim had learned to manage her anxiety and was considering becoming a veterinarian when she grew up. Of their original 6 children, 5 had completed the intensive 6-month program and moved to the maintenance phase, monthly sessions designed to reinforce their progress and provide ongoing support. Only Tommy Walsh had struggled, his anger management issues requiring additional therapeutic interventions that Sarah's Hope couldn't provide. But even Tommy had learned enough to avoid the residential placement that once seemed inevitable. Mrs. Morrison, Carlos called out, using the name Maria still sometimes forgot belonged to her. Can I show the new kids how Thunder responds to voice commands? Of course, Maria replied, gesturing toward 3 new children who had started the program the week before. Just remember to explain why we use soft voices around the horses. The wedding had taken place 8 months earlier, on a perfect October afternoon in the pasture where Jake had first seen Sarah. It had been a small ceremony. Way and Lynn flew in from Vancouver. Dr. Miller and Mrs. Patterson attended, along with several families whose children had been transformed by the program. Carlos had served as ring bearer, carrying the rings in a small box he'd made in woodworking class. Maria had worn Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. Jake had found it in storage and offered it tentatively, worried it might be inappropriate. But when Maria tried it on, the dress seemed to carry with it Sarah's blessing, her approval of the love growing between her widower and the woman who was carrying her dreams forward. Sarah would want her dress to witness another beginning. Mrs. Patterson had said, tears in her eyes as she helped Maria with the buttons. She believed love multiplied when it was shared, never divided. Now, as Maria watched Carlos work with the horses, she could feel the life growing inside her, the child she and Jake had created together, due to arrive in the spring. The pregnancy had been a surprise, but a welcome one, adding another layer of completion to lives that had already been richly blessed. How are you feeling? Dr. Miller asked, noticing Maria's hand drift unconsciously to her still flat abdomen. Good. A little tired, but happy. Maria paused, considering her words. Grateful, I suppose. For all of this, for how everything turned out. It was true. The path from desperate hitchhiker to ranch wife and program director seemed impossible when she looked back on it, like a story too perfect to be real. But it was real. The program that now served over 40 children annually, the marriage that grew stronger with each shared challenge, the community that had embraced her as one of their own. The sound of a truck in the driveway drew their attention. Jake was returning from town with supplies and news from their latest expansion meeting. The county commissioners had approved their request for additional land, allowing Sarah's Hope to build residential facilities for children in crisis situations. How did it go? Maria asked as Jake approached, his face showing satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. Better than expected. Not only did they approve the expansion, but they've agreed to provide partial funding. The state grant came through to $500,000 over 3 years. The news was so good it felt surreal. Maria had dreamed of residential facilities, of being able to help children who needed more intensive support than weekly sessions could provide. But the financial requirements had seemed impossible to meet. With Way's latest investment and the state funding, we could break ground next spring, Jay continued. Just after the baby comes. Their child would grow up surrounded by healing, by children finding their way back to trust and hope. Maria couldn't imagine a more beautiful inheritance to leave as son or daughter. Carlos finished his demonstration and approached them, leading Thunder with practiced ease. Thunder wants to know if you're going to teach the baby to ride, he said with a grin that had taken months to coax from him. Eventually, Jake replied, reaching out to stroke Thunder's nose. But first the baby has to learn to walk. I could help teach them, Carlos offered. I know Thunder really well now, and I'm going to be here for years and years anyway. The casual certainty in his voice, that he would remain part of their extended family, that Sarah's Hope would always be his home base, made Maria's throat tight with emotion. This was what they had built, not just a therapy program, but a community of healing that created lasting connections. We'd love your help, Maria said. But first you need to focus on starting high school next month. Tom says you're nervous about leaving the ranch every day. Carlos's expression grew serious. What if I mess up? What if I can't make friends, or the teachers don't like me, or I get angry and do something stupid? It was a legitimate concern. Carlos had never attended traditional school, having been moved between foster homes and alternative programs throughout his childhood. The transition to regular high school represented a major test of his progress. Remember what we've practiced, Dr. Miller said gently. When you feel overwhelmed, think about Thunder. How does he behave when he's nervous? He moves slowly, pays attention to what's around him, trusts the person leading him, Carlos recited. And what do you do when Thunder is nervous? Stay calm, speak softly, let him know he's safe. So what can you do when you're nervous at school? Carlos considered this, working through the coping strategies they practiced. Move slowly, pay attention, trust the adults who are trying to help me. And remember that even if I mess up, I can always come back here and talk about it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a van from the County Social Services Department. Elena Vasquez emerged, along with a small girl who looked to be about 6 years old. Sorry we're early, Elena called out. But I wanted to get Isabella settled before our official intake meeting. Maria and Jake exchanged glances. Isabella Ruiz was their youngest referral yet, a child who had witnessed unspeakable trauma and hadn't spoken a word in 3 months. Her case would test the program's ability to reach even the most damaged young souls. Isabella, Elena said gently, kneeling beside the child. Remember what I told you about the horses? This is where they live, and these are the people who take care of them. Isabella said nothing, but her large dark eyes tracked across the pastures where horses grazed peacefully. Something flickered in her expression. Interest, perhaps, or the faintest stirring of curiosity. Carlos, without being asked, approached slowly and knelt down to Isabella's eye level. Hi, he said softly. I'm Carlos. When I first came here, I didn't want to talk to anybody either. But the horses, they don't care if you talk or not. They just care if you're kind to them. Isabella's gaze shifted to Carlos, studying his face with the wariness of someone much older than her years. Want to see Thunder? Carlos asked. He's the best horse here. Really gentle, and he likes kids who are quiet. Isabella nodded almost imperceptibly, her first communication since arriving. As Carlos led Isabella toward Thunder's paddock, Maria felt the familiar surge of awe at the program's power to heal. Children who had been wounded by adults found trust again through animals who asked nothing but kindness. Young people who had lost their voices discovered new ways to communicate. Kids who had been convinced they were broken learned that healing was possible. She'll be okay here, Elena murmured, watching Isabella's tentative approach to the fence where Thunder waited patiently. This place works miracles. Not miracles, Maria corrected gently. Just love applied consistently over time. That evening, after Isabella had been taken to her temporary foster placement, and Carlos had gone home with the Hendersons, Maria and Jake sat on their porch swing, watching the sun set over the pastures that had become their kingdom. I got a call from the state university today, Jake said, breaking their comfortable silence. They want to study our program, document our methods, maybe help us train other centers. That's wonderful, Maria replied, though part of her worried about losing the intimate, family-like atmosphere that made Sarah's hope special. I told them we'd consider it, but only if they understood that our success comes from treating each child as an individual, not from following a rigid curriculum. What do you think Sarah would say about how big this has all become? Jake considered the question, his arm tightening around Maria's shoulders. I think she'd be amazed and proud and maybe a little worried that we might lose sight of the simple truth that started it all, which is that every person deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be given a chance to heal. A horse nickered softly in the distance, and Maria felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter of life that seemed to echo the healing happening all around them. I love you, she said to Jake, the words carrying the weight of gratitude for everything he had given her. Safety, partnership, purpose, and a future bright with possibility. I love you too, he replied, his hand joining hers on her abdomen. Both of you. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Maria Chin Morrison reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a desperate woman on a Texas highway to a wife, mother-to-be, and director of a program that was changing lives. The transformation seemed miraculous, but she understood now that it had been built from countless small acts of faith. Faith in Jake's initial kindness. Faith in her own ability to rebuild her life. Faith in the healing power of horses and humans working together. Faith in love's capacity to honor the past while creating something new. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Isabella's long road to recovery. Carlos's transition to high school. The complexities of expanding their program while maintaining its heart. But tonight, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of horses and the warm presence of the man who had changed her life by choosing to stop when she needed help most, Maria felt complete. In the pasture, Thunder raised his head and looked toward the house where the humans who loved him sat planning their future. For a moment, horse and people seemed connected by invisible threads of understanding, all of them part of a story that had begun with a simple question. Will you take me down? The answer, as it turned out, had been yes, but the journey had led them all home instead. Years later, when visitors asked Maria about the origins of Sarah's hope, she would tell them about standing on Highway 82 with nothing but $43 and a prayer, about a rancher who saw potential instead of problems, about a dead woman's dream that had become a living legacy. She would explain how love multiplied when it was shared, how healing happened one relationship at a time, how sometimes the most important journeys began with strangers choosing kindness. But what she remembered most clearly was that first moment of trust, climbing into Jake's truck despite her fear, accepting his offer to come home even though she had no reason to believe it would lead anywhere good. That leap of faith had changed everything, not just for her, but for dozens of children who found their way to the ranch seeking the same thing she had been looking for, a place to belong, a chance to heal, and someone willing to believe in their worth. The Morrison Ranch became famous in child psychology circles, studied by universities, and replicated in other states. Maria published papers on the integration of immigrants into rural communities, spoke at conferences about trauma recovery through equine therapy, and consulted with organizations around the world. But no matter how far her influence spread, she never forgot that it all began with a man who chose to stop his truck for a stranger in need. Isabella Ruiz, who arrived as a silent, traumatized 6-year-old, eventually became the ranch's youngest certified riding instructor. Carlos Mendoza graduated valedictorian of his high school class and returned from college to manage the residential program. The Rodriguez twins started their own nonprofit working with immigrant children. Amy Peterson became a veterinarian who specialized in therapy animals. Each success story added another layer to Maria's understanding of what they had built. Sarah's hope wasn't just about horses or therapy or even healing. It was about the radical act of believing that every person, regardless of their circumstances or background, deserved a chance to write a better story for themselves. When Maria's daughter, Sarah Elena Morrison, was old enough to understand the ranch's history, she would ask her mother about that day on the highway, about the decision that changed everything. "Were you scared, Mama?" the little girl would ask, safe in the knowledge that her mother had found her way to happiness. Terrified, Maria would answer honestly. But sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. Sometimes it's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. And Daddy was the right thing? Maria would smile, looking out at the pastures where her husband worked alongside their grown children from the program, where horses and humans continued the endless dance of healing that had become their life's work. "Your daddy was the beginning," she would say. "The right thing was everything we built together after that." The ranch continued to evolve, generation by generation, child by child. But at its heart remained the same simple truth that had brought Maria Chun from a roadside in Texas to a life beyond her wildest dreams. That kindness, offered freely and without expectation, had the power to transform everything it touched. And in the evening, when the work was done and the horses were settled for the night, Maria would sometimes walk to the end of the driveway and look down Highway 82, remembering the woman who had stood there with nothing but hope and determination. She would think about all the other travelers on that long road, all the people who needed someone to stop, someone to say yes to their whispered prayers for help. Then she would turn back toward the lights of home, toward the sound of her family's laughter and the gentle nickering of horses, knowing that she had found her answer to that ancient question of how one life should be lived. The answer was simple, with open hands, open hearts, and an endless willingness to believe that tomorrow could always be better than today.